And the Talk Shop resumes in Studio 255 at the Laramie Plains Civic Center. This segment brought to you by Pole Mountain Pharmacy, dedicated to the health and wellness of Southeast Wyoming from their location at 4th and Harney. And the good folks at Laramie Range Ford, along with the Benton Rusty, I-80 Towing and Automotive Services, and Chanos Village. We appreciate the support of you listening as well. Brent Bien, candidate for Wyoming governor, returns this segment with more for us regarding the legislative session. We just talked last segment about taxes and elections. Are there other topics that you might in Laramie, Wyoming? You're a native of Laramie. You know quite well that one of the most important topics on the mind of people in Laramie, Wyoming is, what are you doing with our university in terms of funding the University of Wyoming? In mid-January, there was talk and conversation about cutting $40 million from the state of Wyoming, University of Wyoming budget. The Freedom Caucus, it was claimed in the title of one article, the Freedom Caucus is playing games with the budget. This particular authoring came from Representative Ken Chestic of Albany County, and Representative Chestic spoke about there was no need to cut the budget. Governor Gordon put forth a full funded, balanced budget, and by the estimation of himself and others, that's the way we should fund it. Your opinion?
This is the biggest budget in our state history. It's a biennium budget. And what we've done and what we see is every time the governor gets up there and talks, he says that all these things are essential. And we don't have a balanced budget, and I'll tell you why, is because the state and the counties have over-collected $9.1 billion over the last 6 years from the folks. So that's not a balanced budget, right?
We've taken more?
Taken in more. Taken in a lot more.
That's where that rainy day fund comes from?
Yeah, something like that, yeah. So you got to wonder what's really going on here. But bottom line is one of the reasons it appears that during COVID that there were the restrictions put on the folks and their liberties is to get that ARPA money, the COVID money that was associated with it. Well, that was roughly $6 to $7 billion that we got over the last 5 years. Well, one of the things we did with that money is we grew government, right? So, and just to remind the folks out there, we have the largest state government per capita in the nation. 1 out of every 4 employees is government, in the state. And, is that necessary or not? I don't know. But I think we got to take a look at what are the essential and non-essential requirements of government. But now that the ARPA money is drying up, is that all these a lot of these government positions that were created now are all of a sudden deemed essential, or they weren't essential before. So why are they essential now? And there is no question in my mind that if you look at if you look at our total GDP, of that, roughly 34 to 35% of our GDP it evolves from government. That tells you how socialistic the state's becoming, okay, when government is that much of a part of our GDP. So we do know that government is huge in this state. So bottom line is we need to start looking at cuts of the government. And it's like, what do we really need to do here? So the $40 million here at UW, that's only 6% of the revenue stream. There's all sorts of revenue streams that come into UW, whether it's tuition, federal, all these other state, all these other things that are coming in. So I don't, and of course, that residency, or I guess actual people who are here, students attending in person, is down. Graduation rates haven't gone through the roof or anything like that. There's really been no marked increase in that. So, again, 6%, I mean, that's really not that much in my mind.
Wyoming Public Radio reported on January 20th, President Ed Seidel from the University of Wyoming, in his last year as president, mind you, the letter issued to staff, faculty, and students was an email that suggested that 160 full-time employees could be cut if this 40 million proposition is realized. As a leader of the state, do you have Do you have expectation of the leader of the University of Wyoming making over $300,000 annually to come up with maybe alternatives that might supersede employee consideration first?
Absolutely. I think what we saw, and I think a bellwether here is we heard everybody cry wolf on this 25% residential property tax cut. Well, we still have all of our services. What it's forcing people to do, what it's forcing government entities to do, is rechannel, right? Rechannel some of this money. Even if we got rid of residential property tax altogether, we could easily fare that. We could. We got plenty of money to do it. I mean, we made $1.86 billion in interest alone last year on the $34 billion we got in the bank. So residential property tax is roughly about $650 million annually. It's only 3% of our total revenue that comes into the state. And in interest alone, we could pay that 3 times over. You know, so what we're seeing here is a lack of a will to rechannel, right? To rechannel money. We've got all these automatic things set up right now. And, you know, UW, I mean, this is a land grant institution. And some of the curricula that's being taught here, I'm not on board with one bit. And you know, it's let's get back to what the university is supposed to be doing. Let's get back to okay, how many professors, how many instructors do we actually need to do this and make this happen? You know, what are the nice to haves? What are the need to haves? And because the financial trajectory that we're on in this state right now is completely unsustainable. I mean, yeah, we'll get away with it for a while. But I tell you, where we're going with the increase in the spending, and I mean, it is just unbelievable. And the thing is we have never done since 1989 a full-blown statewide budgetary audit. So we really don't know how much money it takes to run this state, and UW part of that. You know, it's like, what do we really need to do here? So any time in the past, as a Marine Corps officer, anytime I put a staff together, it's always been a lot smaller than my predecessor staff. It's always been a lot more streamlined. And again, these are Marine officers that I've replaced. And it's always been far more efficient. Because, see, I'm a believer that leadership is not trust but verify, like you always hear around the state. You know, if you have to verify what these people are doing, then it's like, why in the world are they in there in the first place? Mine is trust and empower. And it's like, you know what? There's a million ways to skin the cat. Right? And if I trust that person, I'm going to put them in that spot. I define the objective. I define the time constraints and the fiscal constraints, and I say go. And as long as it's done ethically and morally, good to go. You know, but that's what it does. And the thing is that brings so much out of people. You know, when you empower them, you know, it's just amazing what's gone on. You know, in my career. So the thing is the nepotism, the cronyism, the establishmentism in Wyoming is rampant. You know, and that's one thing that we're really going to have to break that paradigm.
Second topic of conversation heavy in January was the Wyoming Business Council. My research has shown $11.6 million in employee salaries every 2 years, $5.8 million annually to run the Wyoming Business Council. Where do you stand on cutting the Business Council or adapting it? Would you suggest any other consideration before total elimination?
My stance on business is simple. Government's business and business is to get out of the way. That's it. And right now, we've become so accustomed to having government's heavy hand in business that people just think it's normal, you know. And none of my policies are regressive. Everything is just about getting back to a constitutional republic the way we're supposed to, with free market enterprise via capitalism. So government's only job in business is to get out of the way, to deregulate, to cut taxes, to ensure that ESG is not enforced, environmental social governance scoring system in this state, never tip the scales, and guarantee you'll never shut this state down again. Because we saw in 2020, I mean, 6,000 to 7,000 small businesses were heavily affected. Some never opened their doors again. So, again, my stance, you know, we've got the Chamber of Commerce, we've got all these other entities that are out there that can, you know, attract businesses, whatever. But I think if there's an atmosphere created for businesses to come, I mean, they're going to come. We want the businesses that want to be here. Right. Some businesses will just never come here. It's just like when kids graduate high school or when they graduate UW. They're going to, some will go to California, some will go to Florida, some will stay here, hopefully. But that's just the way it is, And but we have to make sure that the environment's conducive for business to come here. And so that's where I stand on this. I think that what they're doing with the Wyoming Business Council is in line with what needs to happen.
You brought up your military service, and this is a point where I want to ask you about a project you did on Guam, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
Please share with our audience, what was your charge, your MOS, in that project?
Well, I tell you, I was my MOS. I was a Cobra pilot for a long time there, and then of course as you go up in rank, you attain more MOSs. So once you get to the rank of colonel, then you have kind of you can pretty much do kind of anything, But it was interesting because at the time, this is in 2016, I had there was some desire there, I guess, not for me, but to go up to the Pentagon. I had no desire to go up there. And then my monitor comes back and says, well, you're an engineer. You want to go build a base? And I'm like, I'll go in. And I told him, I said, I'd rather spend 3 consecutive years in Iraq than one day in D.C. Please don't send me back there, And so I ended up going to Guam. And he said, yeah, it's on Guam. And I said, shoot, I'll go to Guam. It'd been 25 years since I'd been there. Or 20 years, and so the whole thing was to build a Marine Corps base on Guam, and then some on Tinian, and a little bit up on Saipan, and then there's a northern island called Pagan, way up north. In the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas, there's 14 islands. Guam is not part of the Commonwealth, even though it's all part of the Marianas Archipelago. And what it was part of was DPRI, which is Defense Policy Review Initiative, which is the whole reposturing of Marine Corps forces in the Pacific. Because regardless of what happens in Europe, China's our number one adversary. It just is, And I think there's a lot of these red herrings with what's going on in Europe and and even in the Middle East. But our number one adversary, without a doubt, is China. And so that was the thing there, was to reposture and between Guam, between Australia, but certain these places around the Pacific Rim and of course Hawaii. And so anyway, it was close to a $9 billion project. And it was behind. I don't like being behind. I like being ahead. And so got there, and I saw the incredible talent that I had in my staff that I inherited. And but I did see how they were being, weren't being, empowered.
What budget were you given for that project?
It was about in 2012 dollars, I think it was about 8.6 billion, something like that. And I will tell you,
did you finish it on time?
We will, and it's. The whole thing there was to start transferring Marines from Okinawa in, I think, 2024. Now, originally that was going to be in 2026. So I pushed to get this timeline. We went from basically 2 years behind to 2 years ahead. So there's a 4-year delta in there, right? And I tell you what, I spent a lot of time in D.C. going, no, this is what's got to happen, in the Pentagon. We got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this. And then really trying to take that one by the reins. And, I just had some incredible people working for me, and they were Navy. They were, we had a contingent of Japanese. We had all these folks that were there, whether they were contractors, whether they were civilian, government service people, and of course Marines, and active duty Navy. And, but yeah, we did, and it was incredible. And I think what it was is my thing was to get folks to believe in what we could do.
Everybody has overruns. Did you?
No.
On budget didn't. Or at budget? Where were you?
Yeah, we were. Now, keep in mind, this thing had been going on for a while, right? Okay. And so when I went in there, I went through all the numbers, and the one thing I wanted was accountability down to the penny. So when we're looking at 2018 alone, we cut almost $1 billion in contracts, and what I wanted was, okay, I want incentives for early completion, and I want penalties for late completion, right? And it's got to be spot on, because here's the deal. This is all taxpayer money, so I always looked at it that, hey, I'm self-employed here, right? Because, this is taxpayer money. So I was very frugal with it. I shut down travel, all this stuff, all these guys that were getting 1K before on United mileage, and those kind of things, like, oh, no. You need to justify to me why you need to go to Okinawa, or why you need to go to Hawaii, or why you need to go all the way back to D.C., because I want to know what's going on here. And but these guys snapped in real quick, and I think it was just an incredible experience, doing it all. And but yeah, it was rolling. I mean, it really was. So
What did you learn about military leadership during your command?
You know,
28-year career. What did
yeah,
you learn?
it's really about it's really about the Marines. It really is, you know, and or the folks working for you, and that's why here. And when I say work, obviously that's different because they actually did work for me here. As governor, I work for the folks. You know, bottom line, that's just the way it is. And you know, it's there's. I just had a conversation with a superintendent down in the southwest part of the state here last week, and I said, "There's two entities here. There's the support ed, and there's the supporting. And bottom line is the schools support the parents. Period. They essentially work for the parents. You know, that's the way it is. And you know, you need to build that trust. And I will tell you that." Trust has always been a huge thing for me because I knew if my guys trusted me or trusted the command staff, that no matter how nasty the mission was or whatever it was, we'd do it. You know, we would. And so I made it a point. I was the only one doing this on East Coast, I know, and I don't know anywhere else, but as a squadron commander in particular, to you're supposed to do like a command climate survey every 18 months, and I wanted one done once a quarter. But I adjusted some of the questions in there to where, do you trust your commander? Do you trust your command staff? Because I knew if I had their trust, because I knew what we were doing, what we were about to do, and if I knew if I had their trust, we could do anything, and we did, and we were the top squadron hands down in Iraq, and I mean we were told that, you know, we were highest sortie generation with, you know, in support of the Marines, in support of all the joint forces down there. And there were a lot of squadrons. I think there were 11 or 12 squadrons online, but they had those aircraft ready. You know, we were ready to roll. And the same thing, you know, any time I had these, either I was in charge or whatever, actually had something like that, and even on Guam, you know, it was, I want these guys to be able to trust me. That means I'm not going to lie to them. I'm not going to pull their leg. I'm not going to do anything like that. So when people ask me, why should we vote for you? And I say, well, number one, I know how to lead. Number two is I know what needs to happen to fix Wyoming. Number three is I have the will to do it. And number four is I'm not going to lie to you. You know, and I think that's kind of what folks are looking for. But it's not just rhetoric. That's just the way I do business.
What was your oath? 1991, you're a graduate of the Civil Engineering Department at the University of Wyoming. What was your oath to go into the military?
So on that same day, it was, you know, I, Brent, do solemnly swear to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will, I can't remember, execute the duties of my office, so help me God. Now, I haven't done that in a while, so... But it just sticks in there.
Pretty strong.
It just sticks in there. And it doesn't expire. That's the thing.
It's really a signpost for the core of your political page online. Talks about you being a principled conservative.
That's right.
That's connected to that oath, isn't it?
It is. And, you know, about a year ago, somebody asked me what that meant. You know, because everybody runs around saying, hey, I'm a principled conservative. Really? Are you really? You know,
labels, buzz tags.
That's right. So I say a principled conservative is someone who has an unwavering, and the key there is unwavering, belief in individual sovereignty and self-governance, the two principles around which our entire Constitution revolves. American exceptionalism, because we are hands down the greatest nation in the world, and absolute truth, as defined by God, because he does, regardless of what anybody says, he defines the rules. That's just the way it is, you know. So that's what I define as a principled conservative. But the key there is the unwavering. You believe in that, period. You know, and you'll go to the mat for it. Yeah.
Military leadership, a career as you've had, and you want to serve the public. You want to continue serving the citizens of America right here in the state of Wyoming. What is your number one goal as a candidate for governor? Get elected, but how will you approach it should you be elected? Number one step that you'll take as governor.
Well, I think the governor sets the tone for the state. Just does. So to me, it's all about putting the people first. Right, we have got to do that, and there's a series of steps in doing that. So it's not just one thing. But you know, I typically say, look, my objective is to raise your standard of living by reducing your cost of living, and that's what we're really going after here. And of course, there's a lot of different pieces out there to make that happen. But we have got to. When I say return Wyoming to the people, and I use the word return and not give it back to the people, because it was never the government's in the first place, but it has been taken by the government. Now we got to remember too that the electorate is responsible for this, because we have the government we have because we put them there. So but I will tell you right now, Eric, is that as I'm going around the state talking with so many folks, there's so many who are downtrodden, and I want folks to believe how great it is to be an American, how great it is to be a Wyoming American, and what we have here in this incredible country. So it is about just changing that entire paradigm, putting people first, and we have got to restore principled conservative leadership, discipline, and accountability to Cheyenne. We have to do that, because we're like I say, we're on a trajectory that's unsustainable fiscally, and we cannot legislate morality, but we can sure as heck defund immorality. And that's what we got to start looking at. We got to quit this stuff about trying to circumvent the Constitution, at every breath. And that's not what government should be doing, but that's what's happening all the time, and we see this all the time. So it is one of those things about changing that entire paradigm and making sure that those who I appoint, those who are up there, that number one is that people are first, period. People's, government comes later. But our job here is to support the people, keeping in mind that $34 billion that we got in the bank, that's not going to put any food on anybody's table. That's not going to put any gas in anybody's gas tank. It's not going to pay for anybody's residential property tax or property tax in general. That is there to sustain government, not the people. But all that money is excess tax revenue. It's all the people's money. And again, I'm all about savings and those kind of things, but there comes a point when it's like, okay, at what cost? When 42% of this state is fixed income, because we are generally a blue collar retirement state. We just are, and that's what makes Wyoming so great. And but it's when we see these continual rises and taxes and all these other things, and they're hidden in fees and all this stuff. And Cowboy State Daily came out with an article last summer that said Wyoming in total is the seventh highest tax state in the nation. That the people are assuming here, and that's a lot. That's a lot. So it is. It's about returning Wyoming to the people, putting people first. That's what it is. So
every legislative session that I've ever attended, day one, Speaker of the House has talked about supporting education, building business so that graduates stay in Wyoming. Is that an essential part of your vision for Wyoming?
Well, it is. It is. So when I look at the way I rack and stack things, and it was really hard to narrow things down to even 5, and to kind of rack and stack those, because I can make an argument for any of them being number one. But right now I've got return elections to the voters. I got return education to the parents, return taxes to the taxpayer, return agriculture to the growers. That's a huge thing, and hopefully we can talk about that more. And return energy to Wyoming. So education is huge to me, because that's our future. That is our future right there, And there's a lot of stuff out there talking about CTE, career technical, education, those kind of things. And I'm on board to an extent. Where I draw the line is I don't want a bunch of just workers. I want thinkers. I want thinkers out there. Kids that know how to use their hand, but who can critically think. So we've got to get critical thinking put back in there. We've got to get rid of all this sectarian curricula that's in there. Sectarian curricula is strictly forbidden by our Constitution. But it is all the DEI, the SEL, the CRT, even Common Core, because it's all Marxist based, right? Marxism, which of course denies even that there is a God and that government is the origination of all your liberty, is completely antithetical to anything that's in our Constitution and to capitalism, right? So that has to go. And I think we've got to get these kids to believe in America again, who love this country again, but who are taught critical thinking, who are taught those skills. Like we used to have shop class, that's where I first learned leatherwork and those kind of things. But at least to use their hands, so when they get to be 18, they can change the oil or whatever it is, change the tire, for crying out loud. And but I do think, we have about 81,000 or so small businesses in this state. That's a pretty big swath of technical skills that are out there. And I do think that, our public school system right now has a lot of room for that. And what I want to do is I want these districts to compete against each other, and I want these counties to compete against each other for the top school district in this state, all the way across the board. And, I'm looking at I always say that I want the Governor's Superior Achievement Award in scholastics, or in, scholastics, in technical skills, and in physical type of education. But all part of that is a leadership component, to where that well-rounded kid, I cannot wait to award this stuff. That well-rounded kid is the top, because we get competition back in. I tell you, competition brings out the best in everybody. And I tell you, when I look at our statistics right now, 3 through 10, grades 3 through 10, or 3 through 12 rather, and I see us, below the 50 percentile in so much. And then I hear, well, we're kind of on par with the national average. And I'm like, we should never accept that. We should want to be well ahead of every state in the nation on all of this stuff. And it does come down to accountability in our schools, whether it's, our administration is so bloated, it seems to me. And I'm talking across all the school districts out there, to where, we have one administrator for every 2 teachers. And my thought there is if you can't lead any more than 2 people, you have absolutely no business being in a leadership role. Because these teachers, nearly all the teachers with whom I've spoken, all they want to do is teach, but they're on underneath these huge administrative burdens. They test to the test, right? They test to the test. It's like, no, that's not what we need to do, And we got to look at these individual education plans, and to kind of take a look at, okay, let's not hold back kids, kind of like that No Child Left Behind. I was never on board with George Bush's No Child Left Behind, because what it did is it held back those who are, could excel. So. And every child's different. I mean, every single one of them's different. And I think what's gone on here, we've really seen with the left, is that they want everybody in a box, right? It's all identity politics, right? All these kids are the same. No, they're not all the same. And I'm not a cowboy. I'm not a farmer. I don't pretend to be one. People keep trying to tell me to wear a cowboy hat, and I just won't do it, because I respect the hat too much to wear it. I'm just not somebody like that, even though I've done that kind of work. But the ranch work that I have done is I've learned so much on there, because you have to do it. You got to figure out how to do this stuff, and to make things go. But to really get these kids, when they graduate high school, right now we're teaching them to go to college. I want these kids, when they're out of high school, that they're financially disciplined, they are responsible, they don't hate the country, they should love this country, and that, they can start a business if they wanted to. I mean, really right now, if you're a welder, if you're a powder coater, if you're an electrician, man, you can name your price. Vocation, absolutely. You can name your price almost.
If you were to be Wyoming governor, one of the pieces of the Wyoming Constitution says that education in the state of Wyoming should be next to as free as possible. Is that an investment that you would prefer to make versus selecting a business, perhaps a business venture to invest in? Would you invest in the people of Wyoming, the graduates of 23 counties, high schools, as a measure to improve the future of Wyoming?
Let's see if I understand that correctly.
If you had 11.6 million in a budget that was no longer being invested in the Wyoming Business Council, where would you invest that funds in order to improve the future of Wyoming in a marked, measured way?
Well, the first thing I do is I probably return it to the people, because it's excess tax revenue, right? So it's like, okay, it's the folks' money.
So you believe in the liberty of individuals to do better with their money
Absolutely.
than the government
Absolutely.
has?
Absolutely. In fact, I will tell you, on day one, I'll introduce legislation right away that ends residential property tax. that ends the fuel tax, that cuts state sales tax by 1%. All that right there is about $1.1 billion. And remember what we talked earlier, is that interest alone that we get off the $34 billion annually, or at least we got last year, was $1.86 billion. We would still have $700 million of excess tax revenue. You know, everywhere you hear around, you hear all the local officials and some of these people, the sky's falling. The sky is not falling. All it is a matter of just restructuring how money gets down there. And of course, these commissioners can always go through and request more money through their legislators if necessary. So the money is there. And again, it's all excess tax revenue. The people can spend their money so much better than the government can. So
one conversation that I heard at the coffee shop last week was people are picking winners and losers. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of government picking winners and losers.
That's right.
Tax incentives going to this business while my business has been in the community for decades. I didn't get that break.
That's right.
They're getting a competitive advantage.
That's right. And that's exactly why I say government's only business, and business is to get out of the way. It really is. And, again, I think capitalism and the free market system, I mean, it's brought more wealth and prosperity to the world than any system before it. And it all started here in America, and the thing is we've grown so accustomed, and I always say compliance, conformance, control is the way the left works, right? And we've come down this road of this gradual intrusion of Marxism, really, throughout the nation, and again with our GDP, with over a third of our GDP being from government, that shows you just how involved the government is in business. It should never be that way, and so it is about getting back to the free market. It is, and I tell you, we've got 400 years of gas, oil, and coal underneath our feet, Trona, everything. I mean, that. And we need to use that, so.
Has Wyoming been fought hard enough to keep its oil mining rolling as strong as it can be?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I think a lot of that, again, this comes down from the top. Okay? It comes down from the top. When your background is kind of left-wing, like the governor's part of the Sierra Club, and those kind of things. When you think that way, when you come out with a mantra that Wyoming is going to be net negative in carbon emissions, well, the only way to get us to net negative, and this is tongue-in-cheek here, but you'd have to get rid of all the people, all the animals. You got to make sure there's no more forest fires, and you got to make sure that Yellowstone doesn't pop, right? There's a giant volcano. I mean, it's impossible to get to net negative. And the thing is CO2 is good. We cannot live without carbon dioxide. We just can't. We're seeing that the sub-Sahara over in Africa is roughly 15% greener than it was just 25 years ago. I mean, that's a good thing. It's a good thing, and it's really interesting. You see some of these oligarchs, and I'll never call them elites. Okay, there's only one elite, and that's our creator. Everybody else puts their pants on one leg at a time. But you see these oligarchs like Gates and Buffett and Soros and all these other guys now that are saying, no, don't plant any more trees. Well, why not? Why not? It's the craziest thing how they changed their tune. But they recognize that the folks, by and large, don't pay attention to what's going on. Okay, and they're very susceptible to these false narratives. And there's a lot of false narratives out there, as you know, and I want to change those. These kids right now, we were talking about education. These kids right now are being taught from grade school. CO2 is bad, that we're a democracy. We're not a democracy, as you know, we're a constitutional republic, that we're the racist nation in the world, all those kind of things. And those things need to stop. All that stuff needs to stop. So then by the time they're seniors in high school, they're arguing with their parents, or whatever the deal is there. So, and you really see this when you look at this holistically. It's like, okay, how do you topple a constitutional republic? Well, anytime you're going against an adversary, you always look for the center of gravity. And whatever that center of gravity is, if you can defeat that center of gravity, you're likely going to win. So the center of gravity of this nation has always been the middle class, right? Always been the middle class. And the center of gravity of the middle class has always been the nuclear family. And so that's what they've been targeting over, and this obviously didn't just happen. I mean, this has been going on for decades, but they've been targeting, and it's all in class warfare is what we're in right now. But when you really target the middle or the nuclear family and you tear that family apart, that's why we're seeing a lot of the problems. That's why people are starting to lose faith in America. I think it's phenomenal that Trump is in there. He kind of brings that spirit back, but we need that spirit in the state restored.
We're visiting with Brent Bien, candidate for Wyoming governor in 2026. Now on the Talk Shop in Studio 255, I'm Eric Henderson, and this program brought to you by Pole Mountain Pharmacy, dedicated to the health and wellness of Southeast Wyoming from their location at 4th and Harney, reminds you Brent Bien in town all day long. He will be in the 11 o'clock hour at Bernie's Restaurant in West Side, Laramie, and that location, Snowy Range Road, 367 Snowy Range Road. And he will take his People First initiative, Brent Bien, to Wyotech campus in the afternoon, followed by a 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. engagement at the American Legion. And Brent, it makes much possible to have support of volunteers and resources. How do people get involved with your campaign?
Come to brentbn.com, or they can always call 307-763-3442. They can send an email, whatever it is. This has just been such an incredible experience because all the money that the opponents out there already have. Even if I had that money, I could never pay for what's going on around the state right now. It's just amazing, Eric. I mean, I'm sitting there looking at this. Every county we have this thing going on in every single county, and the counties are crosstalking. And it's so incredible to see. And the people want it so bad. Again, I think they are tired of the distrust, the lack of accountability, the lack of discipline, that's out there, and they are tired of the nepotism. They really are. They're tired of the establishmentism. So, and it is about putting them first and empowering the people again, which made this state so great.
Final segment after this.